the MC for the meeting, and then my colleague Jean Kelly will take over and do the panel discussion. So a couple of reminders. We have the CAS AES Awards ceremony on Wednesday, April 19th. And then our next research seminar will be on Wednesday, May 3rd, and it will be covering accelerating agriculture's climate resiliency. So as most of you are familiar with now, since this is the third of the seminars that we've done, our goals in this are to get people together with food that helps, also good companionship, and to share research in our key priority areas. And we'll talk a little more about that later. And to stimulate your thinking and discussion in those areas, and also to get you together to chat so that you can think about collaborating across our boundaries, across our departments and our disciplines. And also, you'll hear today, to develop our people's speaking skills. So these guys are really great teammates and players, and you'll see that they've actually rehearsed this, and it's a lot of fun to watch them. I'm glad I'm not doing that. Yeah. Because I'm from Nebraska originally, and I can't talk as fast as Dawn. So the seminar series is guided by our strategic vision. And if you remember, we call this Paula's Peach Tree, and we have 4 peaches on the tree. She cringes every time I say that. And they all match our college's mission that fits in with our land grant mission. So today, we're going to be focusing on innovating local and global food systems. And here, you're going to hear Dawn define this for us as she gives her talk. But we're modernizing the quality and safety and sustainability and efficiency and effectiveness of food systems to achieve healthy communities, economies, and individuals. And we do this using our cutting-edge research, and we do it to provide nutritious food for Colorado and the world. So our first speaker this morning is Dawn Thilmany. Dawn is a professor of agribusiness and an extension economist. She's the co-director of the Regional Economic Development Institute. Thank you, Dawn.
Thank you, Jan. So yes, they gave us the grand challenge of covering our program in 5 minutes, so watch me go. So I am Dawn Thilmany, and a lot of people might wonder how I ended up working in food systems. Well, to tell you a little tale from where I come from, up on the farm right is near my farmstead. We had the Farm Progress Show, which brought people from 123 countries to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, when I was a sophomore in high school. That gave me the best indicator of what global agriculture meant possible. On the very left side of that is the farm I grew up on. I was the girl, so I was not allowed to drive the machinery, probably for good cause. But that garden you see there, which was pretty substantial for a garden, was my project, in addition to a little bit of a field. They broke off for me to grow sweet corn, which was my first money-making enterprise. And it kind of connected with me more because reading those Richard Scarry books we all did of the farmer's market stand, that was what all my friends thought when I said I was a farmer, what I was doing. So that led me in my high school public speaking state final paper to talk about why am I not selling my sweet corn through Hy-Vee food stores? And a food systems expert was born, according to my dad. He still joked about that. So what do we mean by food systems? We mean both of it. So there is that global system, that corn, soybean, hog farm I grew up on that was exporting outside of our region. But we've also increasingly seen the reemergence of the food system. And besides those two supply chains, this schematic, I think, does a really good job of talking about the drivers, forces, actors, and outcomes. And what we believe food systems is how we better integrate and intertwine the conversations across those 4 things driving our food system. So one way we have done this here at Colorado State University is with the support and vision of our bosses, gradually developed what we've called the Blueprint for Food and Agriculture, which is a combination of both a public attitude survey, which we just redid, and I'll give you some summaries of highlights today, a value chain analysis using data and stories to talk about how Colorado's food system works, And then the last time we did this, we had the support to go and do community conversations to also learn what was top of mind with our community as across the state, because all of them have different things top of mind. So that was the blueprint we got done in 2017. We've not updated it yet, but we've got pieces of that puzzle coming together, including this year's public attitude survey, which you might have seen a press release on. And then we have gone out doing some community conversations also in support of a food summit we now hold annually. So in this public attitude survey, the reason I'm highlighting the small snippets I am, knowing we're going to have more information coming out from that, is when we ask people about their agreement with statements, the most agreed upon statement was the public of Colorado, which we surveyed about 1,000 of, really want to see that redevelopment of our food system. We don't know if that means fully local, regional, but we know it's top of mind with our citizenry. And if you look down below, it's a little harder to read, but I circled it. They also want to know more about our farmers and food system. And so that connects well with some of the activities our ag education partners within this system are working on, including Ram Banding and all the event work they're doing with the Ram Academy. So we also, in addition to dealing with private enterprises like farms and food businesses and ranchers, also really try to think about those community and societal impacts. So one place we're working on the left-hand side is to bring up and have support systems for food startups, including a project we're doing down in Pueblo, along with CSU Pueblo and Pueblo Community College, to bring support systems online for people who want to start their own food businesses. We in Colorado are one of the pockets of food startups across the country. The two coasts and us dominate that space. So we're trying to support that. On the right-hand side, we're also worried about people having the ability to get the food they need. So we work on food security programs with another partner, Nourish Colorado, where, for instance, we look at, for some of those food support systems that really are meant to make sure people have food security, they also have economic wins for our communities as well. One of the target audiences we've worked on in particular is our Beginning and Farmer Rancher program. Again, in the map, you'll see in Colorado, we have a fairly high concentration of these. So almost 15 years ago, Martha Solons is in the audience, and I and Adrian Card helped start a program. Now we've gotten so much of a track record with it, we're at the level of looking nationally with partners to evaluate what those programs have been doing to help those people survive and thrive in their food systems. And finally, a nice case study to end. If you think about what's going on with egg prices, these are top of mind with our egg hunts coming up this week. What's going on with egg prices was oddly a perfect storm of everything that goes on in the food systems. We had this unfortunate disease outbreak that continues to wreak havoc, which is this outside external force. We as a state, before we knew that was going to happen, enacted new cage-free laws because we've seen some consumer interest in that, including what we see in our survey. At the same time, we have this overall food price inflation and particularly strong consumer demand in the holidays we just wrapped up in the winter and now that we're facing. So with that, it shows you how important it is we're working together to tackle these issues, because that case study couldn't be done by any of us ourselves. So with this, I'll leave a slide to wrap up. Just there's lots of ways to get involved with the food systems group. If you don't see a topic you're working on up there, I'll be surprised. And with that, just want to give attribution to all the partners we work with. And thank you very much.
How is it that she's from Iowa and she can speak faster than me? So our next speaker is Jennifer Martin. And Jennifer is an associate professor of meat safety and quality and a meat extension specialist in the Department of Animal Sciences. And she's online because she's in sunny California while we're sitting here in the snow. So good morning, Jennifer. Afternoon, Jennifer.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jan. Can you all hear me okay in the room?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
we can. Thank you.
I'm going to share my screen and make sure this works. All right. So like Dawn mentioned, we were charged with overviewing some research relative to our programs in 5 minutes. So I'm going to move through this really quickly, but hopefully my title slide has caught your attention. So if you're curious about me or about how I got involved in the swine industry, It started because I wanted to be the first female president of the United States. And I realized when I was in high school that that wasn't going to happen. So instead of being the first female president of the United States, I got a pig, a show pig, and I named him Herbert after the 31st president, Herbert Hoover. And some of you in the room may wonder what a show pig is. Well, a show pig is an animal, a pig that's raised for exhibition. And surprisingly, show pigs make up about 2% of the US pork population. And there are thousands of swine exhibitions across the US every year, thousands of animals and participants in these exhibitions, and they last as long as 7 days. Most of the animals in a swine exhibition end up in the food chain, so go on to be used in the pork supply chain. We talk about pork production or pig production in the US and Colorado. The US has more than 72 million pigs and 67,000 pig producers. And most of those pig producers aren't large commercial producers. In fact, the majority of pig producers have fewer than 500 pigs. And collectively, those pig producers raise more than 27 billion pounds of pork every year in the United States. And if you look at Colorado specifically, Colorado has over 1,200 farms with less than 2,000 pigs and only very few farms with more than 5,000 head of pigs. Now, the majority of pork that's produced in the US, so over 1/3 of pork, in fact, is exported to other countries and consumed outside of the US. So if you look at the value of a market animal, today's market price is around 76 cents per pound, which would make an average market hog worth about $228. And 1/3 of that value is derived from the export market, so pork that's not consumed in the US. So that said, maintenance of this export market, maintaining our ability to export pork to other countries is vital to the US pork industry and the US pork supply chain. African swine fever. If you haven't heard of African swine fever, it's a highly virulent hemorrhagic virus. High mortality, there's currently no treatment or no vaccine for African swine fever. So in order to prevent this highly fatal disease from impacting the swine industry, prevention is key, meaning we must prevent this disease from entering into the US. And if it were to enter into the US, we must prevent its spread outside of pig operations to other operations. So when we think about prevention of disease, we know that maintenance of a disease-free state, specifically as it relates to African swine fever, is vital. And if we lose that disease-free status, we lose the ability in the US to export pork. Thankfully, our commercial producers have very robust and rigorous biosecurity plans with a priority on disease prevention and stopping disease spread on swine operations or from one operation to the other operation. So while our large commercial producers understand biosecurity well and do a fantastic job of maintaining and limiting disease spread, our exhibition swine producers do not. So we know that most exhibition swine producers don't have site biosecurity plans, and disease prevention is not always as important to a smaller producer as it may be to a commercial producer. So we also know that these exhibitions specifically are known to be disease spreading incidences. So show pig exhibitions usually involve the commingling of lots of different pigs from multiple farms, multiple states, multiple people for several days. We have very little information about the on-farm biosecurity, but there has been research indicating that diseases such as influenza are spreading from these exhibitions. So there's a risk of disease spread from these swine exhibitions. So we set out at Colorado State to do some research on assessing the perceptions and knowledge gaps among this particular population of swine exhibitors around African swine fever. What do they know? What are they unsure of? What are they doing actively to prohibit and mitigate disease spread on their own operations? So an exhibition survey was performed with youth from 14 states across the country. And interestingly enough, most of these exhibitors exhibited pigs outside of their home state, meaning if they lived in Colorado, they were traveling to an exhibition in Nebraska, or if they lived in Texas, they were traveling to an exhibition in Colorado. So lots of spread around the country, lots of movement of these animals across the country, very, very different from commercial swine production. The survey asked them what they know about African swine fever. Is it a bacteria? Is it a virus? What type of pig can it infect? And we actually learned through this survey that most youth are unfamiliar not only with the symptoms of African swine fever, but unfamiliar with what it is and what types of pig it can actually impact. We also learned through this that over 25% of the respondents don't think that African swine fever can impact their own pigs, so pigs that aren't part of a commercial operation. And through similar surveys have learned that the majority of exhibition swine owners or participants in this process don't have site biosecurity plans. So they're not practicing biosecure practices to maintain a disease-free state when they come back from these swine exhibitions. And even among those who do have biosecurity plans, less than 25% of those producers are actually implementing or using their plans on their own facilities. So the survey highlighted that even though the exhibition swine industry is a relatively small sector of the commercial pork industry in the US, so less than 2% or around 2% are comprised in the exhibition swine industry, they're the weakest link in our domestic pork supply chain. So although it only represents 2%, all of those pigs are going into the pork supply chain, turning into pork for consumption of either consumers in the US or consumers in other countries. These substantial knowledge gaps around infectious disease and site biosecurity introduce the potential risk for disease spread and potentially catastrophic disease spread. Because if this disease enters into our domestic pork population, again, we lose the ability to export pork to other countries, which would be catastrophic for the US pork supply chain. So moving forward, our research team is working with small producers, specifically exhibition swine owners particularly, to help them not only develop, but find practical ways to implement site biosecurity plans so they're prepared for prevention of these important diseases which have catastrophic impacts. And a special shout out to Hannah Cochran, who's in the room, who led the majority of this research and has been instrumental in seeing Coloradoans particularly have access to improved biosecurity practices. And that's all.
Your goal to be the president of the United States. I think you've done it.
I should have kept up with it.
So our next speaker is Brad Tonnessen. Brad is a research scientist at the Organic Agricultural Research Center in Rogers Mesa. And Brad's going to share with us his work.
Should I have that? Oh. Oh, Jennifer's online. All right. Thanks for your introduction, Jan. Thanks for having me here. So I wanted to start with something that was close to me from growing up in New Mexico, and that is chili. So before I came here as a scientist for CSU, I was working in extension at New Mexico State University breeding chili peppers. And that's a picture of me and my COVID attire with Dr. Stephanie Walker showing off a newly developed variety. And so I'm sure you're thinking, what does he feel about Colorado Pueblo chili? And I'm totally fine with it because New Mexicans are confident in their own abilities. And I guess I'm a Coloradoan now, so I shouldn't say that. But anyway, so chili is a cultural foundation in New Mexico. And it's not just the pepper, it's also the seed. So all of the growers in that area, they either save their own seed or they're buying from seed companies that are contracting seed production from local growers. So it's very much this regional seed culture. But what is regionally adapted seed? So another example is up in northern New Mexico. Their environment is a little harsher, a shorter growing season. So they rely on land-raised chili varieties bred over hundreds of years that mature quickly, and they also have this characteristic shape, color, and taste that the locals have grown to expect. But they've run into some issues because as outcrossing can occur with other peppers, they're losing those traits that they used to rely on. So we started, wait, where am I going here? Oh, I'm missing a slide, I'm sorry. So we started a New Mexico participatory plant breeding program. And what we did is we taught these seed producers genetic breeding, genetic isolation techniques, seed selection, plant selection, to allow them, to empower them to be farmer breeders and save those traits that they were losing. And so coming to Colorado, and that's a picture of our variety trial from last year at the station. And coming to Colorado, the environment is also tough. So dramatic climatic events, soil issues, drought events, all of that stuff makes it pretty difficult to grow your garden variety tomato, right? And what I've seen also is that there's plenty of large and small seed companies that are breeding regionally adapted seed to address this issue. Now, you might be thinking that I'm ignoring larger multinational seed companies and larger breeding initiatives. And those are also important, but oftentimes they're focusing on widely adapted varieties, which can sometimes neglect the specific things in a single place in a region, like farmers' cultural methods, or all of the specialized variables for a particular place. So with that in mind, we started the regionally adapted seed vegetable variety trials here at our station and also complemented at the Orchard Mesa station in Grand Junction. And what we're doing there is trialing varieties of both regional seed and non-regional seed from organic seed companies that are very large across the nation with very popular varieties. We're trialing them side by side of different crop types across the season, as you can see here. And what we find is that the regional seed is no joke. So these are the reports that we give out to our seed producers. And for example, this is a regional radish variety. And if we compare to the larger seed company's variety, they're right on par or higher in yield. And they also resist bolting, so they're a little more heat tolerant. So there's some really good traits from these regional seed companies that we're seeing. And actually, I wanted to mention too, in terms of the local food system, farmers are really interested in using this local seed, and our program is helping to inform them in making their decision. But access to bulk seed from these companies is still not there. So we're hoping this program can actually bolster this local seed economy. What we're also doing is distributing this produce. So our station, we donate everything that we produce. We're not trying to compete with the small local growers around us. And with cooperation with Ann Duncan at CSU Extension and Amanda McQuaid at the Western Colorado Research Center, we're getting this produce, putting it in boxes and getting it to underrepresented consumers. And we're giving them information on recipes, preparation, info on the trials, and just getting the word out there. What we're also doing is tasting trials. So at farmers markets, we're doing trials with these different varieties. We also do it at our field day. So if you'd like to come, August 31st is our next one. And we often roast a lot of different chili varieties, so it's a fun tasting panel to try. And we're also getting together a chef's panel this year to hone in on that data on preparation and also taste. So finally, I just want to say thank you to the farmers involved. And local seed is essentially the foundation of local food, isn't it? And I think if we do rigorous scientific study on both regional and non-regional seed, we can hone in on the good varieties for the Intermountain West. And thank you to also Keegan Athey here. So she used to be at our station. She now has her own farm, but she really helped me start this up. And then we have our personnel at the research station, new person, Max Kirks, also Hannah Grossman, and then Brian Brady, and additionally helpers on the project, Annalisa, Eli, and Casey. So thanks.
Thanks, Brad. And while you're talking to Brad about peppers, you can also ask him about ice hockey in New Mexico. He's an ice hockey player. Why New Mexico? So our next speaker is Jessica Davis, and Jessica is a professor of pulse agronomy in the ag and at CSU and in the Ag Experiment Station.
Thank you. Our goal is to increase pulse crop production. But what are pulse crops? They're a specific group of legumes that are harvested as dry grain for human consumption. And there are many different kinds. Here are just some of the ones that we work on. So you can see the diversity, and it's really fun to work with these crops. The first time I worked with a pulse crop was on cowpeas in West Africa when I was a PhD student. These women have just harvested the cowpeas that are grown in an intercrop system with pearl millet. So why are pulse crops so important? Pulse crops have the potential to have many positive impacts. For example, they can impact human health through reducing cancer and diabetes. They can improve the environment through things like nitrogen fixation and reduced water use. And they also play an important role in crop rotations by breaking up pest life cycles. So if pulses are so great, why do we see trends like this one? This is showing you the dry bean acreage in Colorado over the last 30 years, where we see a 90% reduction in those 30 years. What's going on here? Before we can turn that around, we need to understand what's causing it. And after talking to a variety of growers about this, it seems to me that the main reason is the ease and the profitability of growing Roundup Ready corn. That's a tough thing to compete with. So there are many obstacles to the growth of our dry bean and pulse production in general, but we have a hardy group of researchers working together to overcome these obstacles. For example, the obstacle of productivity or profitability, this is critically important. Farmers won't grow things if they can't make money from them. And so we're working on developing production budgets, doing market analysis, and developing new market opportunities. Another barrier is nodulation. Nodules, as you see here on the roots, this is where the magic happens, where nitrogen fixation occurs in partnership with rhizobium bacteria. But what we're seeing around the state when we dig up bean plants is that there's less and less nodulation. There's less nodulation than there used to be. So we're tackling this issue and figuring out why isn't there so much nodulation and what can we do to reverse it? Because this is a critical, like a competitive advantage for legume crops. If they're not nodulating, no wonder they're not being grown. Water use is critical for any agricultural enterprise, and pulse crops often have less water use compared to other crops, and that also presents an additional opportunity, and that is to lease that additional water that they don't need in the summertime for other uses. So that helps with the profitability angle as well. Salinity is what you see here, that salt crusting on the soil surface, and that causes plants to perceive a drought and basically go into a drought condition. So, and unfortunately, beans are one of the crops that is more susceptible to salinity. So we are tackling this by looking at different pulse crops and varieties to figure out which ones can tolerate even these conditions. Crop or soil health is also really important, and the nitrogen fixation that pulses do provides an opportunity for improving soil health. Unfortunately, many pulse crops have low crop residue, and that could go against soil health. So we're working at understanding this better so that we can optimize soil health through pulse crops. No crop is grown in a world by itself, and so how pulses fit into rotations is critically important, and we're evaluating those rotations and how could pulses fit in and developing brand new rotations as well. We work at a variety of the research centers around the state and also in Africa and Ethiopia and Nigeria. And we have an amazing team of scientists from a variety of disciplines that are part of this team. And there's always room for more. So if you're passionate about pulses and have ideas for this work, we'd be happy to have you join us. The road ahead is not an easy road, but we believe if we're persistent that we'll be able to achieve improved human health and environmental sustainability. Thanks.
Our next speaker is Joshua Craver. And Joshua is an assistant professor of controlled environmental horticulture in the Horticulture and Landscape Architecture Department. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. All right, so I think we all are probably pretty familiar with the mnemonic Roy G. Biv. What becomes really interesting, though, is that if we think about Roy G. Biv and these colors, it's actually really interesting to see that these are colors we're experiencing every day from the light that comes not only from the sun, but also from the fixtures in this very room. And so I have a little bit of an unhealthy obsession with light. So I came in here yesterday with a spectrometer and just took a really quick scan just to prove a point. And so what you can see on this figure here, on this spectrum, is that we are experiencing right now the full spectrum of light, everything that's ranging from the blues all the way to the reds. And this is incredibly important, not just for us to be able to sit in this room and experience comfortably these presentations, but it's also important for our plants when we're providing them electric lighting, because this light quality and intensity is influencing the plant as a signal as well as an energy source. And that's some of the work that my lab does in controlled environment production. Now, when we think about controlled environments, the most common facility that I'm sure we're all pretty familiar with are greenhouses. But in addition to greenhouses, we've also seen a resurgence in recent years of this idea of vertical farming, where we grow plants completely indoors under only electric lights. And while providing electric lighting to the plants gives us great opportunities to enhance yield and also to emphasize various quality attributes, this also poses one of the greatest limitations to controlled environment production. So here we see a figure or a picture, and what we often think is that vertical farming is this new technology, that this is new to our industry. Oh, sorry. Can everyone hear me okay? I think I was talking a little bit out. And so what's actually interesting to see, though, is that vertical farming is not new. This has actually been occurring for decades. This is a photo that one of my PhD advisors from Purdue University took back in 1978. And this is Phytofarms of America. And so what you can see is we have lettuce plants that are being grown under lighting, and this is a multi-story facility. What's really interesting, though, is that if we look at these lights overhead these lettuce plants, we have high-pressure sodium and metal halide fixtures. What's interesting to take away from this is that these electric fixtures are not incredibly efficient at converting electricity into usable light for the plant. And so it probably comes as no surprise to anyone here that Phytofarms of America is no longer around today. And that's in no small part due to the electricity costs that were associated with this lighting. To paint a little bit of a picture here, when we look at our controlled environments industry today, about 20 to 30% of variable costs for greenhouses are tied up in electricity for lighting systems. And for our vertical farms, that accounts for about 40 to 50% of variable costs. So light emitting diodes, or LEDs, have helped to address some of the issues that I showed on that previous slide. Specifically, they generally have relatively high electrical efficacies in terms of converting electricity into usable light. And they also give us the capacity to be able to tune the spectrum to give the plants exactly the colors or wavelengths of light that we desire. A great example of that can be seen in this picture on the left, where we have lettuce growing in a vertical facility. And that light that the lettuce is being exposed to appears purple because we're providing mostly red and blue light from these LEDs. So my lab does quite a bit of research in terms of lighting, and not just looking at how we can optimize lighting, but also looking at how light may interact with other parameters in the controlled environment. So a great example of this is our work on far red radiation. So if we look at that figure up here in the top right, you'll see the red LEDs, and those appear nice bright red to us. But as we move further to the right, the LEDs further to the right appear a little bit dim. And that's because that's far red light, and it falls just on the edge of our visible spectrum of what we can see. What's interesting, though, is that there are an array of responses that plants have to far red light. And so if we look at the bottom left, you'll see 2 lettuce cultivars that we grew under varying intensities of far red light applied at different times during production. And what we've been looking at is how we can leverage and use far red light, and how far red light also may interact with other environmental parameters such as temperature. All of this work is being done as part of a larger project known as Project LAMP, which stands for Lighting Approaches to Maximize Profits. And as that name suggests, our goal here in this project is to work with our growers to be able to provide information as well as tools to help them optimize their lighting systems, as well as to ensure that they're maximizing their return on investment. Now, we don't only work in lighting in my lab, we also look at other environmental inputs in these controlled environments. A great example of that is carbon dioxide enrichment. So if we were to walk outside right now today, we'd be sitting at a CO2 concentration of around 415 parts per million. What's interesting though is in controlled environment facilities, we're often injecting or enriching CO2 upwards of 800 to 1200 parts per million. And so some of the work that we're doing in my lab is trying to understand how we can maximize the dosage and the timing of that CO2 enrichment to make sure that we're using this input efficiently and also not causing detrimental responses to our crops, such as acclimation that you see listed here. So here's some examples of facilities that we have in the Denver area, and I'm by no means going to say that controlled environment agriculture is the future of ag, but I do think that controlled environments are a tool in our toolbox that can help us address a variety of issues facing us in terms of local and global food systems. And so optimizing lighting is one of those areas, but I think there's a huge opportunity for innovation as well as collaboration to ensure that controlled environment production is both economically feasible and also environmentally sustainable in the years ahead. So I am out of time, but thank you so much. Here's all the grad students and a couple of people that makes up the CSU Controlled Environment Horticulture team, and where we get some of our support. Thank you.
Often that he works down there a lot. So our last speaker of the morning or afternoon is Marek Borowiec. Marek is an assistant professor in the Department of Agricultural Biology and he's relatively new.
Thank you, Jen. All right, thank you for being here. When I was an undergraduate student, I was lucky to volunteer for a researcher who was studying the ecology of ants in Papua New Guinea. And that researcher, Milan Yanda, spent years trying to understand the biodiversity of ants in these tropical ecosystems. To sample the ants, his team would take this 3x3 foot square of PVC pipe, put it on the forest floor, and then grab all of the leaf litter that's there, put it in a bag, and then eventually into these extraction bags. Once the ants were separated from other critters that were there, my task was to sort them into different species. And in one of these samples collected from 1 meter squared, I counted 123 different species of ant. For comparison, there's about 200 species known from the entire state of Colorado. So that really blew my mind, and as an impressionable undergraduate, it really made me want to study this diversity. And later, when I was in graduate school, I was writing resources for insect identification. And they are very difficult to use. Typically, they involve answering a series of questions about the appearance of the insect, and those can be full of jargon and really difficult to interpret, especially if you don't have any pictures. Another problem with insect diversity is that there's really so many of them, or insect identification, I should say. Literally half of all species that we know are insects, and there are thousands upon thousands that haven't even been named or described yet. However, many fields of study depend on accurate and efficient identification of insects. And for example, in order to fight a disease vector, first we need to identify and know what it is, right? When I was a kid, I fantasized about this device from Star Trek called the tricorder, which you could pretty much point at anything and learn everything about it, right? And fortunately, nowadays we have something like this. We have our smartphones, and they are becoming a little bit like the tricorder, especially when they're combined with this emerging technology of artificial intelligence. So when I was, when in 2016, I read this article about AI getting better and better at identifying objects and people in photographs. I thought, wow, can I understand this technology and can I apply it to this difficult problem of insect identification? But what is AI? Sort of in simple terms, it is any algorithm that makes computer act without being explicitly programmed. Today, most of these algorithms rely on something called deep learning. And deep learning is a subclass of computer algorithms that rely on neural networks. As the name suggests, neural networks are inspired by biological nervous systems. and they are composed of nodes and connections, and they can be trained by having these nodes be made more or less sensitive, and these connections stronger or weaker. One common way of doing this is to expose the network to a number of pictures with known labels. And initially, the network is unlikely to guess the label correctly. But when that happens, we can actually measure how each node and connection contributed to the error and adjust the sensitivity and strength of connections. Over time, this process lets the network represent very complex hierarchical patterns and eventually recognize really abstract and complex concepts like that of an ant or a cat or a dog, something that wasn't really possible with traditional computing. So in 2020, I was a professor at the University of Idaho, and I teamed up with some other researchers there to propose applying this technology to identification of insect pests of cereal crops. And the US Department of Agriculture decided to fund us and develop this sort of an app and a portal for identification of pests in small grain production systems. We gathered images of insects known to show up in cereal fields, and the preliminary results are encouraging. The algorithm can tell 3 species of aphid with 84% accuracy. Currently, we're building an interface that will allow the growers to submit observations, share them with others like extension specialists and crop advisors. The app will allow growers to browse insect pests and search for information about them online, and of course identify them using our AI model. There will also be room for human verification of these identifications. So if you work in cereal fields or you know someone who does, please let us know. You can contribute to this project by submitting images of insect pests. And finally, I wanted to just highlight that this is just one example of using AI in agriculture. There are many, many research teams and companies trying to apply this technology to every component of our food systems. And thanks to you for your attention and to all my collaborators. Thank you.
Okay, if we can get the panelists to come forward, and my colleague Jean Kelly will lead a question and answer session. Oh, Jennifer, yeah.
You were missing that voice line. Well, that was great. Let's give a round of applause, everybody. That was really wonderful. It shows you all the exciting things we have going on. So the way this works is we're going to just ask them a bunch of questions and have some conversations. You can ask them almost anything, I guess, but preferably about their area of expertise. And the unfortunate thing is if you don't ask questions, I ask all the questions and you'll all be asleep in about 15 minutes. So anyways, anybody want to start off with the first question? I can't have Elias do because I still owe him lunch from the last time. So first question from the audience in the back there. Yeah, you have to come a little bit forward. We have to record this, so you have to. Okay. Yeah.
Normally people can hear me when I talk.
Hey Jess, I just had a question about the nodulization. Do you guys have any thoughts or ideas of why that's not happening? Maybe fugitive nitrogen or?
It seems that it's, leftover nitrogen from previous crops, that we haven't verified that for sure at this point. So either from fertilizer or that's deposited in other ways through the air.
Yeah, and so would that be, so you're really not getting the nitrogen credit from the pulse, right? I mean, with the ones you've done so far. Right? There's like an excess nitrogen, you think, in the system.
Definitely.
Okay.
It seems that way.
Yeah.
I mean, we've just started that, but we did recently get some funding and hope to really tackle that and both the genetics and environmental impacts.
Right. Okay, cool.
Have you seen, just Have you seen any increase when
Online?
you
Yeah.
coat the seed?
When I bought the seed,
If you have a seed coating, do you see any increased nodulation?
I don't know. That's a good question. Oh, I'm sorry, the question was, have you seen any impact of the seed coating on nodulation? We don't have enough data to look at that yet, but could be.
Okay, great. We have a question from Loston down at Spur. Joshua, how big is vertical farming industry in Colorado in percentages versus horizontal farming?
That's a great question. I would say exact percentages I don't have perfect. I will say that we have a growing industry in terms of vertical farming. And so we have Calera that you saw on the image that just moved into the area, as well as Infinite Harvest. We've got Plenty just up the road in Wyoming, which doesn't count as Colorado, but they're a huge player in the vertical farming industry. So I'd say we're still growing in that sector. There's a lot of examples, but greenhouses is by and large the majority still of what we have in terms of controlled environments.
Loston, is that okay? He's going to type in the answer. Well, I'm assuming Loston accepted that answer. So anyway, any other questions so far? Yeah, Jan.
So Brad, can you give us some examples of traits that would be local traits in peppers? I mean, a pepper's a pepper.
Pepper's a pepper.
Pepper's a pepper. Brad, remember you do work for the state of Colorado.
Right. Local traits, for us, dealing with a shorter growing season, because down in Las Cruces, New Mexico, you have all the time in the world. But here, you have frosts coming in pretty quick, so you need earlier maturity. And we're monitoring that in all the varieties we're trialing. And just to plug, we are growing some of Bartolo's newest lines as well. So actually, it's pretty interesting. We have varieties from a friend who's a seed grower in Arizona, NMSU varieties, as well as Colorado varieties, all together at once. And we're looking at maturity and how quickly they're starting to turn red to see which ones are the earliest.
Okay, there's a comment. I'm going to just read you the comments from Katie Russell. Brad, let's expand your seed project down here in Southwest. There's a farmer incubator program starting down the road. Would you like to answer that?
Sounds good, Katie.
Okay. Other questions? I have a question. Hey, Don, so I don't know if a lot of people are familiar with the blueprint, right? In terms of, so tell me, I know, but when was that done? And the real question is that now there's been all this stuff happening, right? We've got climate change, we got COVID, we've got population in Colorado skyrocketing. So what is your warm fuzzy feeling about the biggest shift that you're going to see? Like, what is this something that you just really want to get some numbers on? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, so I had to go through the blueprint quickly, but if you Google blueprint for Colorado agriculture, you'll find it easy. It was pre-COVID, so I would say the three big shifts we probably have seen is COVID changed how people are eating. Even with things renormalizing, people are spending more on food, even pre-inflation, and they're fragmenting where they're buying. They're buying in more locations, probably because they went online. When you have all your standard stuff coming in from Amazon, you can go get the stuff where quality matters, fruits, vegetables, meat, bakery, locally. Right. So we saw that shift happen in the consumer space. I would say in the production space, it is the climate smart partnerships that I didn't even have time to start touching on, but this idea of bringing industry, government, and academic partnerships together. And we always talk about the warm fuzzies of agriculture having great societal outcomes. Now we have the technology and the AI to measure, are our soils getting better? Is our water quality getting better? So I think you're going to actually see a lot more accountability for if ag and food companies are really improving various parts of societal outcomes. And that's where us researchers come in, because we have the toolboxes to help verify that.
Are you suggesting you're seeing more of the partnerships now? Like, in other words, okay, so that's what's shaking things.
Well, and I mean, academia is being asked to the table a lot more, I feel like, than it was at the start of my career 25 years ago.
Right. Questions? Come on, everybody, wake up. Let's go. Jan again. Okay, we don't want my colleague Jan, lead answering all the questions.
Jennifer, why are there no vaccines for immunizations for the swine fever? virus?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are vaccines that are in development. I think some of the challenges with this vaccine, the most effective version has been a modified live virus, and they've seen mutations back to the parent strain in the modified live virus. So trying to find alternative and innovative vaccination strategies. And to be honest, this disease started, well, it's been around for a while, but really the global attention on this started in 2018, 2017, and a lot of the vaccine development strategies when the pandemic began shifted from development of a vaccine for ASF to development of a vaccine for COVID. So we're just now starting to see even scientists at CSU prioritize ASF vaccine development, but it's proven to be quite challenging.
Do you want to take first shot at this question?
Yeah, so relative to, I think an important part relative to the African swine fever is at present, it's not currently impacting the US. So we do not have this virus in the borders of the US. It's getting close, but thankfully haven't had it introduced into the US yet. So financial impact to date, avian influenza has certainly been more impactful than African swine fever. Arguably, one of the things we've seen as an unintended consequence of African swine fever impacting other countries is the US swine industry has actually benefited financially because our export market has gotten larger as other countries have been impacted by African swine fever and they're willing to pay more for US pork. But domestically, we don't see it here yet, so it hasn't had as much of a financial impact.
Okay, great. I've got a question from JB down at the Ark Valley. I thought it was going to be for Brad, but it's not. It's actually for Josh. Josh, what's the biggest challenge for indoor farming? Is it the high investment? Is that still the number one challenge, or what are other challenges?
Oh, there are so many. I would say the capital investment is a huge one. So you're not off the mark there. It takes an enormous amount of money, and the lighting systems alone account for a huge percentage of that. But then it's also just the energy costs. And that's where I was getting at. Lighting alone, especially for vertical farming, accounts for a huge percentage. And so, yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to actually show that this is an economically feasible model, what crops make sense. And that's why you only see a couple of big players right now that are able to have that investment to make vertical farming, at least seem feasible at this point.
Right. Questions?
There's another question for Josh.
Okay, go ahead. Here.
Yeah, it got press muted. Sorry. So how much of an impact do you expect vertical farming will have in the overall horticulture industry? And will it be mainly tied to cities? And will it be comparable to the organic industry?
Yeah. So I think that is still, again, I'm going to play a little bit of like a to be determined. And I think if you ask any horticulture controlled environment faculty right now about this question, they'd say, oh, there's a lot that we're still trying to figure out. But I think in terms of horticulture, we're seeing that there are select crops that make a lot of sense to grow in controlled environments. And we're expanding that definition slowly but surely as we better understand how we can optimize systems, really enhance the quality and the yield of these crops. And so I think that it is very much a growing industry at the moment with a lot to prove, just because of the cost associated. I don't know if I fully answered the question. Oh, yes. And so the organic, especially for hydroponic systems, becomes a really complicated question that I know there's actually proposed some work down at Spurgs. We just don't have good organic fertilizers for hydroponic systems at this point. There's a lot of potential. They have a few on the market, but they quite honestly just don't perform well compared to the conventional. But I think where we see the most benefit of controlled environments that I tried to at least hint at in the presentation is that you have the potential for urban production in areas where you aren't able to produce crops, which is most areas year-round. And so we have off-season production, high yields. We can place it in the middle of urban areas. I showed some examples of greenhouses on rooftops, such as Altius Farms. As well as Gotham Greens, which is now expanding in Colorado, started out as rooftop greenhouses in New York and Chicago. And so I think we see this niche that controlled environments can play in terms of being able to be placed in those urban settings and really meet a need in terms of off-season production, especially. So
I have a question, Mark. In terms of the work you're doing with the image work, and I don't know the degree to which you have to do image analysis or anything like that. What do you see the applications for, like extension? In terms of people being able to go out into their field and just flash what kind of opportunities would you see there?
Right, so I think I think because some of the least complicated and easiest applications of AI involve imaging, and the fact that we all carry phones that have cameras now, I think that's a very natural way to apply it. And so I would imagine and hope that eventually it will make the lives of extension specialists easier by allowing them to take a photo of a plant that is diseased, or maybe it has some sort of an insect on them, and have an algorithm guide them towards identifying the problem, right? And it's never going to be a sort of a fully independent system, because we get new things come in, new pests and emerging diseases all the time, right? But if we sort of decrease the amount of work that it takes to narrow things down to a certain level, I think that can be used by a lot of folks, and they can use these tools to educate, and there's already apps out there, sort of general purpose apps. You can go out and take a picture of a plant and get a suggestion of what it might be. And I think extension educators can use that to help folks help themselves.
Great, thanks. Hey, Josh, this is another one from Spur Campus. Josh, any way to estimate when larger crops can be grown in vertical farms? This is grains, question mark, higher value crops, question mark.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So larger crops, the question really becomes when we could sell, potentially an ear of corn for the same price we could sell a head of lettuce. And I think that's the biggest limitation as we talk about agronomic crops and placing them in these vertical farms. And it's not even just a height requirement, but it's also the time it takes to produce usable yield, and also the value of that yield and the inputs that have to go into it. And this gets into some complex, wonderful equations we can do about like the harvest index and where is that break-even point, where does it make sense. I think that's why we've seen most of controlled environments be fast turnover crops with high value that we can grow in high densities. And so we've seen lettuce and leafy greens and herbs obviously be a huge push. But we're seeing more of propagation, microtubers becoming more of a push, as well as we look at how we can leverage this use of space. Because again, the amount of produce that we can have on a square foot basis is just astronomical compared to field production, because we're growing vertically. We can also optimize the environment. But it's important to remember that it's coming at a cost, and there is lots of costs associated. And so I think that's where anything, when we go even high wire with tomatoes, it becomes really difficult to justify in a vertical setting, but certainly can make sense in a greenhouse setting.
Okay.
So,
question here and here.
This one's for Marek. It's kind of out there with AI. I keep seeing all of these articles about AI overtaking 300 million human jobs. And so I'm just wondering, like in an industry like agriculture, it just seems that like agriculture will always need human input and human labor. So I'm just kind of wondering, do you think AI will ever reach a level where it no longer needs human input and we're relying on it as the expert? Or I don't know what your experience and thoughts are.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think a real concern, right, that many people have right now is basically automating away jobs and doing it so fast that policies and the economy can't really adapt. And that's more of a question to like a futurism researcher. And I will just say I am worried about it, having worked with it and knowing what it can do. Like, for example, if you can drive a car, you can imagine that robotics combined with it can accomplish a lot of even mechanical tasks, but also quite intellectual ones like that ChatGPT technology, right? And so yes, I think that's a real concern, and what's going to happen, I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
Right, Don, let me chime in, Don, on this one.
Yeah, two things from this, from the economic perspective. We have labor force issues, so there is some jobs we actually need to start losing. And some of these tasks are very tedious and the ones people don't want to do and we can't pay well for. And we're gonna have a 20% smaller Colorado working population in 20 years. We need some of this to get automated because we are an aging population now. Japan has always had that challenge, we're finally there. So, and even Colorado, a young state, has that problem. So imagine some of our older states. So some of this might resolve other issues. The second thing is we are, as he said, seeing AI play out in a lot of the supply chain and so forth. So it also could end up being up that what we do want left is skilled jobs. And a lot of these jobs although it automates some things, what is going to be the last funnel down to actually translating that information and data is going to need very skilled labor. And that's why I think our college is pivoting into where we want to be in the data and information science space, because all of us still need our sciences, but we also are probably going to become more information and data translators than we were 30 years ago.
Okay, I got a question here.
Josh, one more question for you. Lighting and controlled environment ag. So we get a lot of interest from pretty small scale producers about containerized, so meaning like shipping containers and that scale. Do you foresee lighting systems and growing systems being scalable down to that level and being profitable for those growers?
The question is profitable, and that's what we're doing so much work on, is to try to figure out where it makes sense and how we can drive down lighting costs to make production more feasible, to bridge that gap. We have a wonderful partner down in Denver, Farmbox Foods, who's repurposing these shipping containers. We've actually got one on the Spur campus that we're hoping to have operational coming here pretty soon. And so it is definitely a way to look at sizing down production. They market it as you being able to scale it up as well, where they say you can stack these one on top of another and you're able to have lots of production in a really small footprint of a parking lot, let's say. They found great success with, for example, food banks, and some food banks that have trouble keeping things like produce like leafy greens on the market, or not on the market, on the shelf. They're able to produce some of that locally and then able to provide that as a service. It, again, comes at a cost though, and I think that's where a lot of what we're figuring out right now is controlled environments is seeing a new resurgence and growth right now, which is really exciting, but it also means there's a lot that we're still learning and a lot that we're trying to do to optimize, both in terms of, you know, they like to refer to them as like light recipes, or how we create environments that are going to optimize crop growth, but then also just the equipment, such as increasing efficacy of LEDs and how that's slowly making it a little bit closer to feasible to pay all this money in terms of electricity for lighting costs. And so to answer your question, we're working on it. I think that Farmbox, in this case, down in Denver, just working with them, they've created a model where container farming can certainly be feasible and can be productive. It just takes a lot of knowledge to go into it, knowing who your market is and the cost associated with still growing those crops in a container year round.
Okay, question.
So this has been boom times for ag innovation in the last. What was that? Who was that?
Austin doesn't agree.
So each one of you has $1 million to invest. What organization or company would you put your money in, and in a sentence, why? And right down the row, please.
Start with Jess. Jess, do you want to go?
No.
How about Kelly and Associates? You could put $1 million into that and take care of that.
Well, Greg, that's a tough one. I need some time to think about that. I'm usually the one asking for money and giving it away. I'm going to see if anybody else has a better idea. Go for it.
Mark.
All right, well, I'm not an investor, but I think companies like OpenAI that are behind ChatGPT, that's something that every other company will want to buy these models and use them. So I would say probably OpenAI.
I don't know. I don't want to be endorsing certain. No, I think there's. I know exactly. You know, I think there's a lot of, if we're talking about the production space, I think there's a lot of large players that are doing production really well that we're seeing in the U.S., both in Colorado as well as nationally. And you know, I was mentioning beforehand that we've got, you know, Claire expanding into Colorado. We've got Plenty that is also expanding, a huge vertical farming company, Aero Farms, over on the East Coast. So we have some companies that are making that feasible, that I would say, like, there could be some potential there, and I think they're the drivers that are trying to push this industry forward. Obviously, I have a bias for lighting, and there's a lot of really great lighting companies too that I'd say, let's keep pushing it and let's optimize these systems to increase the electrical efficacies, but also to just develop better technologies that give our growers more flexibility. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a non-answer, but
well, Josh, before we move on to Brett, but what about the things you hear about all that industry is going belly up now? You know, greenhouses, and so just like, give us the sort of the skinny on that. Like, what's really going on?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is knowledge going into it, and planning for your markets. And so
Okay.
we're seeing some of this happening right now in Colorado. We have a vertical farm right now in Denver that unfortunately is phasing into greenhouse production. And a lot of that was because of lighting issues that I've been able to work with them on and off over the last few years. But it's just not a great lighting installation from the start, and then realizing how much money is now going to have to go into renovating to now make that a usable facility. And it just doesn't make economic sense at that point. And so it's a turbulent industry. The margins are thin. And so mistakes like not installing the right lighting system can lead to a company going belly up, for sure.
Okay, great. Brad, your $1 million question, please.
Yeah. First, I just want to comment. I wonder if there's any plant breeding programs for indoor ag there, because it seems like you're optimizing the system.
Yeah.
It is a huge area of growth right now.
There's your answer, right?
Yeah, that's my company. But for me, I don't want to sound too anti-establishment, but you know, you witness a lot of you know, I'll stay in the realm of like vegetable seed, but you see a lot of centralization of breeding efforts, which is good for a certain scale of agriculture, but not for smaller scale in local communities. If there was a way to invest in just a breeding effort that's more regionalized, you know, Colorado had a network, maybe 4 quadrants around the state that were focusing on the issues involved at each area. One particular story I hear is that like sweet corn in Olathe, have you ever heard of that? Yeah, and so it's really popular down there. They used to produce their own seed down there, and it used to be adapted to that area. And as the person in charge of that, so I hear, left the industry, they've turned to getting your varieties from larger companies elsewhere, not necessarily adapted to the area, and also the money leaves the region then. And so I don't know how investing $1 million in this is going to change anything. But
you should stay anti-establishment. Okay, I'm going to go to Jen before I go to Don. So Jen, what about you? Where would you go in terms of innovation with, you said with pork industry, for example?
Yeah, so in the space that we've been talking about, I think as a meat scientist, I want to say something related to meat, but our ability to produce meat to feed a global population depends on the health and well-being of our animals. And so I think in the pork space specifically, the development, and even certainly for other species, the development of tools that maintain, such as a vaccine for African swine fever, strategies for foot and mouth disease. And I think most importantly in that is making sure that any technologies we develop to maintain health and well-being of our live animals is accessible to all scales of producers. And so it can't just be something that exists at a level where it's unattainable or non-accessible to small producers, because what we know about one of the best parts about the Colorado and U.S. livestock industry is the majority of our producers are small producers, and we need to make sure that tools and technologies are accessible to them. So something in that space, and I think making sure that we prioritize all sizes of producers would be a really great value add.
Okay, great. Don, you're going to triple the money. I know you.
The jaded part of me would say pay an influencer that sways public opinion and consumers on that. But apparently that's what's moving some of this stuff right now. It's unfortunate, it's true.
Yeah.
But I would say, and as someone who came up through 4-H and FFA programs, I would invest in putting entrepreneurship programs back in high schools, because I think we have not trained people to be their own business owners, make all these you just heard about the complexity of managerial decisions we're asking farmers and food companies to do. We're not equipping them for that. We're equipping them for the science of the production. We're not equipping them for all the decisions manager has to make these days. And we are one of the top 5 states for entrepreneurs, and that includes in food companies. So I'd invest in getting our young people thinking like entrepreneurs, which Greg Graff is smiling. He's buying me a drink next time.
Okay. Hey, there's a question from JB. Oh, there's another one. We import a lot of black eyed pea every year in the U.S. How can we encourage growers to grow more? How can we convince consumers to eat more soybeans and more pulse? This is definitely a Jen Davis question. We all know the health benefit. Yeah, that was JB, yeah.
Well, let me say it before, they are eating more. We have our big companies investing in more pulses and, I mean, didn't Arden just buy the chickpea unit out of Montana? Our consumers are responding, not fast enough, but all the just.
You're good, Jess.
Well, there are the alternative protein markets
Yeah.
are making a difference.
Right,
Not necessarily for black-eyed pea at this
Right.
point, but there's a lot of opportunity here. In fact, if I had that million, Greg, I needed time to think about it.
so now,
This is where we should invest,
Right.
right? In new pulse products.
right,
For example, Henry Johnson's lab every day is making pulse bread, and everybody in the lab tastes and ranks it on various categories.
Nice.
So there's an opportunity there. So that's where I want to put my million.
yeah, well, Jess, I mean, the thing about, but by the way, everybody, Jess just started this program about a year and a half ago, and she's like sort of resurrected, the activity of pulse crops. I mean, really great work, Jess. And what about, like, you don't get the support the wheat growers get, or the corn growers? How do you do that? Like, where do you, is there another, are you looking at anything in the field? Maybe it's the health benefits, or rather than the producers or the seed companies,
It's true. The local dry bean board is, just has a very small amount of money because of the decline in acreage.
I got you.
They don't have a lot of money to invest
Right.
in research. We have had opportunity with the ARS, Pulse Crop Health Initiative, and
Right.
been able to get some money there. So thinking more broadly has helped.
Any questions on that? Anybody? Before Amy's got one.
Just more of a comment. When I was diagnosed with cancer, the first person I talked to was Henry Thompson, one of the first people. And he encouraged me to eat like 1 to 2 cups of pulses a day. But it was the first time I learned about pulses. So we may all know the health benefit, but all the nutrition training, everything that I did with my journey, it wasn't there. So I do think somehow we need to do a better job of educating those who have health challenges that it's a huge benefit and not that hard to eat a cup or 2 a day.
Right.
Excellent, Amy.
And I think actually this is why the Henry's bread idea is so cool.
Yeah.
Because there are 12 million loaves of bread bought in the US every day. Could we sneak a little bit of beans in there? Where people don't even know
That's
they're
right.
eating beans.
Yes. Peanut butter and jelly right on top of it, man. That'd be great. Mayonnaise, yeah. Anyway. Mayonnaise. Anyway, so mayonnaise on anything. Anyway, okay, Jan.
I just think Jennifer's pigs could eat pulses and make them healthy.
Okay. Any other questions? How are we doing for time? Oh, we have a question before. Hold on.
Thank you. I have a question for Jennifer and Dom. I don't know hoping that you two could answer it, together. When I was in Texas, there are a lot of wild hogs. It's a pest. It's a huge pest issue. Can we turn them into, like, harvest them and then, just, yeah, I don't know what's the right word for it, but, would that solve some of our pork issue? And, they're free range, they're all the good benefits.
You're having the same problem with white-tailed deer back east.
Yeah, we actually have an APHIS wildlife lab that's one of the things they work on. Like, it's a really big problem. It's an invasive species. And so we domesticated pigs for a reason. They're actually quite dangerous if they're not domesticated. So I think finding a way to harvest them besides hunting, but they actually are now putting out incentives for people to hunt them and stuff. I don't think they're ever being thought of as part of our food supply chain, though. Jennifer might prove me wrong on that. I think we're actually really just trying to actually address them as a pest. But Jennifer might know more than I.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. They're an invasive species and they can be catastrophic to producers and farmers. In fact, my family raises, we farm in Texas and we will hire people in helicopters to come and get rid of these wild hogs. So we don't traditionally consider them part of the food supply chain. Interestingly enough, though, they are a disease vector. And so as it relates to African swine fever, particularly, what we've seen overseas is they spread this disease really commonly. So there's a race in the US to figure out, as this population of wild pigs in the South especially is exploding, if we see African swine fever come into the US, they're going to be really rapid spreaders of disease. And because they're pigs, right? They commingle and get in and interact with commercial pigs or pigs that do go into the supply chain or do go into the pork industry. So they present a really big challenge, and not one in the US that we currently have any piece of a handle on.
Yeah, when I was in Hawaii, those feral pigs, man, they're nasty looking too. Man,
Yeah.
They scared the crap out of you. I was like, whoa, yeah, nasty. Okay, yeah, we go.
Yeah, Jennifer, if I have the $1 million, I want to form a company that, we get the hogs from your farm and then we just ship them to China. Seriously, it's gonna be, we're gonna make a lot of money.
Yeah.
Okay. And yet are we good? Are we? Oh, sure. Random question. Why do so many pulse legumes have animal names? Yeah. Oh, I'll give you the mic here.
I guess I'm thinking of cowpea. Which other ones? Anyway, cowpea, I think it's called that because it can also be used as forage. But what other pulses have animal names?
Chicken.
Oh, chickpeas. Do they have anything to do with chickens? I don't know. I've never thought about that.
It looks like they have a little beak is what I was told.
Oh, there you
A
go.
little thing.
Any more questions? Jen, I have a question. Jennifer, where are the processing for hogs in Colorado? Where are they located? Like, are they big processing? I mean, are they smaller outfits? What are they?
Yeah, so we don't have any commercial slaughter operations in Colorado. Most of our pigs are produced or harvested in small plants, small facilities. We do have contract growers in Colorado. So in northeastern Colorado and then more recently in southeastern Colorado do we see contract growers, but no commercial harvest in the state of Colorado.
Okay, great. All right. Anyway, well, listen, gang, we are up to time. And was there another question? Oh, more food? Oh, eat more food and give our audience, give our panelists a hand. One more hand. Great job. Oh yeah, let's thank you. Yeah, okay. Well, so thank you everybody who organized this, Amy, the whole team, Paula, Anna, everybody, all the work done at the college level for doing this. It's great. We can't wait for the next one, Jan. So thank you very much, everybody. See you guys next time. Okay, bye.